Welcome to the Made for More Parenting Podcast, a production of Emmanuel Schools and Summit Ministries. I'm Roger Erdvig.
And I'm Maggie Pope, and we're your hosts. In today's episode, we are tapping into the normal goal setting that is often associated with the new year, but we are putting a family biblical worldview spin on things. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, and it is a new year. It's the time of year when people begin to reflect on last year and create resolutions or adjust goals they have made set in the past. Given that it's a prime time to reflect and set goals, we're focusing on the most important area of planning we can engage in, and that's intentionally planning the contours our family life takes on based on the things we value and emphasize most.
Yeah, you mentioned resolutions, Roger, and the statistics showing how quickly New Year's resolutions fail
Yes.
are staggering. So, in all conversation over the past few months, though, we've been talking about reflecting and taking inventory of things and how important that is, not just for us, but for our kids. So, we are going to lean into the reflective nature of January, but what we've got today is, in our opinion, so much more worthwhile.
Yeah, it's worthwhile because it will involve our entire family. And this process that we're going to talk about today can help increase communication in our homes. And of course, it is prime work for shaping biblical worldview in ourselves and our kids. And as promised, we have our first guest on the show this month. Maggie sat down with our good friend, Mr. Rodney Knox, the head of school at a great school in Florida, and they discussed this idea of core values for our family.
Yeah, it was so much fun. So let me tell our listeners just a little more about Rodney Knox by way of a formal introduction. So Rodney has been serving as a head of school for 16 years and has been in education for 25. And I had the pleasure of working with Rodney at the last school that I served. He came to our school during the last 2 years of my time there. And let me tell you, it was such a pleasure to work with him and his wife of 20 years, Angela. And I also had the chance to interact with all four of their children. Miranda, who graduated and is now 19, Cameron, who graduated last year as well. He's 18, and then Bo and Brooke, 16 and 14. But, Rodney is a passionate, very energetic leader. And when he came to our school, he really transformed the culture in such positive, purposeful ways. And he had this way of systematically gathering input, which of course subsequently led to a lot of buy-in for all of the changes that he made. And these changes really involved identity, the identity of the school and all the individuals who were working in it. So at the beginning of this process, he discussed these values, the values the school was working on with parents. And he encouraged parents to do the same in their homes. So that idea just really piqued my interest. So through lots of conversation and observation, I became a pretty big believer in what he was talking about. And we wanted to share that with our Made for More listeners. So, before we get into this interview, in case somebody is thinking this way, I want to just address the idea that may be floating out there and with a parent that's saying, family core values seem like an idea light years away from my current reality of raising kids. How do you
Yeah.
respond?
Yeah. Amidst diapers and deadlines and all those kinds of things.
Mhm.
Core values, you got to be kidding me. So, yeah, we understand why at kind of first read or first listen, it may seem that that's so distant from everyday life. But I want to quickly argue why this is such an important topic. And here are my two reasons. First, if you've been listening to Made for More podcasts at all, you've heard us talk about three dimensions of a biblical worldview: our head, our heart, and our habitual ways. Well, Maggie, you mentioned earlier that core values for a school speak to the identity of the school, and that was what your experience was with Rodney leading
Mhm.
your school through that process. But when we say identity, we mean the ways a school functions, like
Right.
how decisions are informed, how they're made, what decisions are made, what's valued, what's celebrated in the community. The core values for school provide common language about the truths the school community has adopted that shape their desire for the school and for the students, and in turn should provide the grounding for all the ways the school does things. So I get that for schools, and you probably heard those three dimensions here. The truths they agree to build help build desire and shape ways of being. That's critically important, not just for a school, but for a family. So my second reason, it really also echoes what we've talked about in the past few months, the intentionality that's required by parents and grandparents to train up children in the ways that they should go. So the ideas that you and Rodney talked about are all about intentionality, increased communication, clear articulation of core values. All of that is all about being intentional, and what incredible benefit that is for us as parents and for our kids.
Yeah, and if I could add to that, my pastor recently taught on Ezra, and one of the takeaways from that dealt with the preparation
Mm,
that the prophet Ezra put in before returning to Jerusalem. So Ezra was a trained scribe. He was like one of the upcoming bright, strong leaders.
yeah.
He checked so many of the boxes that we would say need to be checked before, quote, doing ministry. Yet in Ezra 7:10, the Bible says that Ezra had set his heart to study the law of the Lord and to do it and to teach the statutes and rules in Israel. So,
Wow.
see, the word study that's there is actually the Hebrew word that means deciding in advance.
Mm,
And it's used in similar contexts when talking about, an athlete who's preparing for some big event or for a military that is preparing strategy for a war. So, despite the fact that in Ezra 7:6 it says he was a ready scribe, he's already checked the boxes,
mhm.
even Ezra spent significant time preparing in advance to go lead the people of Israel. So, this is why it was so encouraging to me. It reminded me that the time and intentionality that we're saying we need to take with our kids is not because we're failing at it or we're not equipped in some way. It's really about honoring God and working diligently in the fruit that comes from that.
Oh my, that is so rich and such a great biblical foundation to have this conversation about preparing with our
Mhm.
kids and for the future of our family. I love it. So as we listen into your conversation with Rodney, here's what we're asking you as our listeners to do. Just suspend any self-talk, any passing of judgment on yourself with what
Mhm.
you've done or haven't done in the past. Just kind of soak this in. We just know that tuning in today is about that Ezra level of preparation that we're called to as parents. So here it is. Let's listen into Maggie and Rodney's conversation.
We are here and we're going to be talking about core values. Typically, we hear core values and we're thinking about businesses. In the educational field, we know the schools, we have core values. But what we're actually going to hone in on today is core values for our family. And that's something that some of us may never have thought about. So tell me a little bit, how did this idea of family core values unfold in your life?
Well, I appreciate you guys having me on. And let me first say this. When you sat down with me a couple of weeks ago and started talking about this subject and how did core values come about in our family, and I started thinking about each kid and how they're acting, how they're responding, and thought, man, I wonder if I've done a good job of parenting. And so it was a little humbling. And so Angela and I, my wife, Angela, started talking about the process. What did we do? What was important to us? And so we listed some pillars that we started with.
Mhm.
And those pillars kind of guide everything. So here's the process that we started with. I've been in education all my life, and I could watch students and I watch how they interacted with their parents.
Mhm.
We kind of took some notes on that of just how they reacted, how they responded from the youngest to the oldest. And we put some things together that we felt like really would matter to our family. This is what we want from our family. This is what we have seen in parenting have the most success. It doesn't mean that there's other ways that we're not successful, but we knew that we could pull some pillars together, some core values that we would live on, raise our kids on, and we
Mhm.
felt like they gave us the highest percentage of success.
Mhm. Based on what you had seen, observed with all of these students that you guys have been around for some time before you started parenting
That's right. I
yourselves.
watched it in my students. I watched it in people who were in my church. Didn't see
Mhm.
them on Sunday for an entire volleyball season.
Right.
And it's not something that affects every family, but
Right.
we decided as a family church attendance. We would
Mhm.
be in church. For the benefit of our family, church attendance was going to be a big deal. So we set it up at the beginning. AAU, basketball, volleyball, baseball. We're not going to take a priority over our family going to church. Now, did our kids never play on a Sunday? Nope, they did. We had a pretty good balance. I would say that in a summer, we told them they would have 2 for an entire summer. But I will also say this, the church we attended, the kids could not wait to get there. And so when we said, no, you're not playing for that team, if they say you have to play on Sundays, they would look at us and say, okay, we want to be in church. And we've held to that all the way up till now. I got 2 that graduated college. And when they come home, all I know is if they're living in my house, they go to church with us. And we do it as a family. Eventually, they'll move out. They'll pick a church. But right now, we still do it as a family.
I think what can stand out about that is, if you've been a Christian for some time, you know that keeping the Sabbath, attending church, being a part of the local church community is a biblical command that is actually for our own good. And what you're saying is we actually saw this play out. But I appreciate that you guys, as a huge sports family, you guys said this is important, but not as important as this. And therefore, we're going to articulate it intentionally to our children that this is what we do and why we do it.
And one of the things I would tell families, if they didn't hear anything else but this, is that your kids and your family having a pastor, just shepherding them, I don't know that there's too many things more important. Having a youth pastor that our kids could go to, me having a pastor I could go to and sit down and do life with. It's very important for a family to understand, finding the right church, Bible-based, Bible preaching, and being pastored and shepherded is very important.
Yeah. To use a sports analogy, you have to have a team to raise your children. So having that teammate in a pastor and a youth pastor is key. I'm curious, what are your other pillars that you guys have?
The other was daily Bible. Now, early on, this is what we're going to do, church attendance, and we're going to read the Word of God every single day. All right. So then my wife had started as she drives the kids to school every day. They're reading Proverbs, they're praying, they're talking through it, to which then she made me do. So I get in my car and I want to put on somebody talking, which drives my kids crazy. So I'm going to turn on a sermon. So I tried to make my car a little more entertaining with, some good contemporary Christian music going. But the moment she was telling me is, did they read their proverb on the way? I was like, well, no. And so we started getting in, and then they read their Proverbs. We talk about it. What's the highlight of the day? And so daily Bible reading was very important to us. Now, I'm going to give you 3 others. Now, we were on purpose about it, but I don't know that we ever actually labeled it and called it. But here's a pillar, guided friendship. We were on purpose about making sure we knew who their friends were, knowing the friend, knowing the family, where are you going, what do they believe? And I'm talking about even friends in the church.
Right.
Because, I don't want my kids introduced to a movie at a family's house that may not have the same standards as we do. Remember, their standards. I'm not talking about that family. It's just for me and my family, I'm responsible for my kids. And so guided friendship came out of it. And one of my kids was talking about how we were able to sit down with them, talk through the reasons why friendships are important and who's influencing them. Another one was personal responsibility. We were really big on personal responsibility. And we started it young with them from ordering out at a restaurant. You go out to a restaurant, we did not order for them. Once they got to a certain age, they ordered.
Right.
Personal responsibility, we were laughing about some things that still today, they're like, why'd you make us do that? But there was a small nick in a car that one of my kids opened the door, and it was a little bitty, it's just small. And so I basically said, let's go back. We went in the restaurant and we went to every table and asked if it was their car. In my mind, it didn't stand out that much. That was a long time ago. And they're going, no, I remember. Bo was in 2nd grade and bent a spoon. He tells me this. He says, look, I bent a spoon in a restaurant. And he goes, you then made me get up, go to the person who owns it, show them I bent. He goes, I could bend it back. He keeps going on and on. But personal responsibility was another pillar that we looked at, and then work ethic. And when they were young, When our kids were like 6, 7, 8 years old, we would have Knox boot camp. All right. And so Knox boot camp was 1 week, 5 a.m. workouts where they got up, they would go out, we exercised, we did some running. We did a thing called an Indian relay run where the last person has to be first. And I'm telling you, my youngest, Brooke, she would have a tough time. I mean,
Aw.
she would have a tough time. But we had to support her. We could not talk
Mhm.
about her. We had to support her through the process.
Mm.
We would do that all week, and then I would fix them breakfast.
Mm.
And it was just something that really stood out to them,
Mm.
that they said that was some groundwork for what they understood is work ethic means you do some things that you don't really want to do.
Mm.
And so again, these are some processes that we found over time seem to work for us.
Mhm.
And even now, we use each one of these pillars to kind of drive home some things that we're working on.
If I can recap that a little bit and say something about that, I think what I really love about the 3 pillars that you said, you were intentional about is that likely it wasn't that you took the idea of work ethic and hammered them over the head with it. Like, you should get up and make your bed because we have good work ethic, or you should do this because we have good work ethic. It was teaching them incrementally in ways that demonstrated what work ethic looked like without having to almost take this legalistic approach to how we're going to be. But just showing them how to live and how to do things, keeping in mind as a parent, we want them to learn hard work. We want them to learn personal responsibility. We want them all of those core values. So I just love and appreciate that, because I think sometimes as parents, we do know at the back of our mind what we're doing. We just have to
Right.
make these incremental steps towards that.
Yeah.
So I think that's great. So let me move on to this part. If I'm establishing core values and I know I've struggled living these out in front of my family, what do I do? Because, for instance, you have this great example of this Knox boot camp, which I love the idea of. But your kids are hard workers when it comes to the court or the field, and it's different than what we see in a lot of kids. The kids want to be the star, but they don't want to do the work. And observed for myself, your kids and their hard work ethic on those areas. So I would love for my own kids to have that, but I don't play a sport. But what if I want to establish these values and I haven't really lived them out in front of my family? What do I do?
Yeah. Well, first, Maggie, I would say this: you actually have lived them out. So I've watched you. There's a reason I'm going for my doctorate, and you're a big part of that. Just
Oh,
watching
thank
you
you.
pursue that, felt like that I needed to pursue that as well.
Mhm.
But let me just, I'll start with, if we struggle living those out in our life, you have to communicate the struggle. All right. So communicate the struggle. I know this. I've had my response to things my kids have done wrong has not been a very godly response at time. I've had some anger issues, mainly in sports when things didn't go my way, but also when I was growing up watching my dad, how he responded to us. A lot of times was in anger.
Mhm.
Now, it wasn't righteous anger. It was anger, and he was right to be angry, but it wasn't
Mhm.
righteous anger.
Right.
And what I think the struggle I've had is when things have gone wrong with my kids. All right. I have too much pride
Mm.
for I judge my kids so fast. I'm ready to take care of it right then and there and find out later my kid didn't do anything wrong.
Mhm.
So there's are some things that I have not lived out. I've had those moments. My kids caught me. I was doing a project and the project was not going well. I couldn't tell you how long I was on this project. And I turn around and all 4 of my kids are little and they are standing looking
Oh,
at me
no.
and I'm like, wow, well, that stinks. I'm
Mm.
just looking at them like, wow, man, I just messed this up.
Right.
And so walk them in, sit down. I've got to say, I'm sorry. I've got to take personal responsibility,
Right.
right? I've got to talk to them about proper communication. And
Mm.
it also gave me an opportunity to talk to them about when we are lonely, hungry, or tired, any of the 3, just stop what you're doing because sin's probably right at your door. So, and I told him, I said, I was tired, I was hungry, and the project was not going well.
Right.
And I was able to say that to them in this. It's not an excuse.
Right.
It's when I should have paused. I should have put the stuff down. I should have walked from it. But yeah,
Yeah.
so I've struggled a few times with my kids.
But I think that's so important, and we know as parents we're not perfect. I make the comment to people and just say, "I'm just trying to minimize the ways I'm gonna mess up my own kids."
Yeah, there you go. I like it. Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
really, we have worked with kids, those teen years quite a bit, and one of the things I've observed so often with that age group is that they're kinda waiting for this magical Christianity to kick in, where they're gonna have it figured out, and they're not gonna make the mistakes, and they're not gonna do the impulsive things, and yes, they're going to get a little less impulsive as they begin to mature, but there's so much power in just saying, "Yeah, I'm not who I wanna be. I struggle
Mhm.
every day, just like you're gonna struggle every day, but here's what we do when we struggle." We
Yeah.
can make it right, first of all, and then I know I have to go to the Lord. I have to just continue to ask the Holy Spirit to do a work in me on those areas that I do struggle. But that transparency is so important because a lot of those teens, they think there's like some super Christianity that you're gonna hold,
That's
and
right.
that they're eventually gonna get.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's
So
right.
then I love that, it was a natural thing for you to just say, "Okay, I screwed up. We need to sit down and talk about this." But there's some homes where open communication has not been established. And to your point, sometimes that's because that's what we lived out as kids. In our home,
Mhm.
maybe you didn't question a parent, you didn't ask the why, you didn't talk about it. It was just, this is what you're going to do. And sometimes we fall into those patterns ourselves. So what would you suggest to the parent who says, if I said to my kid, let's sit down and talk about this, they would fall on the floor, or they would be super upset, like, no, I'm not talking to you. What do you do when that hasn't been established?
Yeah. Well, I think you have to, well, you just start the process of establishing it.
Mhm.
And it's going to be uncomfortable. Um, what I would probably do is I would start having family meetings. They
Mm.
just required family meetings and make sure they then don't turn too serious.
Mm.
We're going to have a family meeting today. What's the family meeting? We're going to sit down and we're going to talk, and it's required. You're going to give me 5 minutes, and here's what we're going to do. We're going to throw out some kind of subject, and then you're going to talk to me about it. And you probably have, if you have more than one kid, you have different personalities. And so
Mhm.
allow one of them to be a smart aleck. Just allow it. It's a meeting. It's not Bible study time.
Mhm.
It's not devotion time. It's family meeting. Maybe even laugh a little bit through it. And then when you pause, just look at them and tell them how much you love them, and that even though maybe communication has been great in the home, hey, this is our starting point. This is our
Mhm.
starting point, and it's 5 minutes. And maybe
Mhm.
it's once a week, 5 minutes. And what ends up happening is the once a week, 5 minutes does turn into it turns into a phone call from your daughter from college that lasts
Mm.
for 2 hours. I mean, incredible. Just
Mm.
one of those moments where, my wife and I are just on the phone with her, and I'm thinking, wow, that was pretty neat. So she wants to talk to us. She's asking questions. And then
Yeah.
she finishes with, hey, when I get home, I want to sit down and really get your opinion on. So that was an early Christmas present for me
Yeah, yeah.
that she asked my advice. And
Yeah,
so
for sure.
it was great. But again, there's communication. So the starting, we talked about the starting point. I would just say start. There's no magic formula. It is just simply family meeting, sit down. Even if you have to put a timer on this as 5 minutes and the
Mhm.
kids are looking at you like they can't wait to be over. Look, don't get on to them. When the 5 minutes is up, if not much was said, send them off and let them know next week there'll be 5 minutes. What you do is establish some things during the week where you might say to them, oh, that's a good topic for our 5 minutes. Now the
Mm.
kid's starting to go with it in his head, right? We get to that moment, especially if you're a parent and you can write it down. All right, that was a good one right there. Don't miss on those teachable moments. Jump into it. Have the communication. It's a 5 minute talk. They'll start this process of going. So that's what I would say.
That's powerful because I think when I think of family meeting, I do. I think it's got to be serious. They've got to be ready for it because I'm going to just have this time where it's so productive for everybody. But what a great first step to just say the goal is not uh, walking away with some great revelation that they might have. It's literally
Mhm.
just, I want them to talk to me for 5 minutes. or
Yeah.
just be in the room, just starting those open lines of communication.
Yeah.
Okay. That is one very, very practical first step, especially for people who have not done that before, where they can start with those weekly meetings. But now let's get even more practical. And how could a parent who's thinking about these things that we've talked about start establishing those family pillars? And is it too late if my kids are older? If I have a middle school or a high school, is it too late?
Yeah. Well, one, it's never too late. I think if you're a grandparent and you missed on it as a family, I would tell you to go dive into the grandkids' lives. I don't think again, you may sit there and go, well, I have no communication with them. Once again, go back and just simply ask for a 5-minute phone call. Hey, let's just
Mm,
talk for a few minutes, establish it. And then as a grandparent, so we're talking about parenting, but grandparents, you're a big deal.
yeah,
And you want to tell your story. So it's never too late.
I
If
love it.
it's not too late for a grandparent to jump back in, then it's not too late for parents who have older kids. But some practical ways that you might be able to. We actually did this with our kids. I'll call it a transformational purpose statement for our family. All right, you could call it a mission statement. You could call it core values, pillars, whatever you want. But let's start with the foundation of what mission is, and I'm going to make it really short and succinct. But a family mission statement is there for us to know the main goal we are pursuing together. All right, this
Mm,
is important. So there's a main goal. And this is what's key. It's not what the parents are pursuing. It's not what the kids are pursuing. It's what we are pursuing together. So remember, we're going to establish some authority because the Bible has given us that. As a dad, look, my responsibility, lead our family.
that's
My
right.
wife, they're going to respect my wife. But when it comes to missions, what are we doing as a family? So as dad, I'm going to try to lead this out, right? And we're going to have a goal. The goal is that, man, we want to be in church. Okay. We want to read our Bible. Okay. We want friends that are doing right. And so that's the goal. We're going to pursue this together as a family, which does help with our communication points. So some families would say, I don't necessarily know how to start this. So that's what I want to give you. I'm going to give you 7 steps
Okay.
that I think could help. Remember, there's no magic formula. I'm only going to tell you what has helped me as we've worked this out with our own kids.
Okay, and I'm
Um,
gonna pause real quick, and then I'm gonna
okay.
let you tell the 7 steps for our listeners. We'll put those 7 steps in the show notes. So if you're driving, don't panic. You don't have to write them down. You can go back to the show notes later and get them. So, okay,
All right.
7 steps.
Okay. So here's the thing. So you're going to call a family meeting. You got to have a family meeting and bring them in and just tell them at the beginning of this, we are going to start on a journey and we're going to find out what is the goal that we're pursuing together as a family. What I would also tell you is let this take time.
Mm,
Don't try to do this in one night. If you want to establish communication, I would say lengthen it out.
okay.
Let it go as long as you can.
Okay.
And I think once you see the 7 steps or hear them, you can kind of understand how you could go slow, go fast, whatever it is.
Right.
All right, so let's go. Step 1 is when you call the meeting, you're going to need a secretary to write everything down. Now, it would be nice if everybody showed up with pen and paper. So if you could require that, come in,
Mm-hmm.
pen and paper. If you had a whiteboard, it does make it a little more fun. All right,
Mm-hmm.
because you're throwing it up on a whiteboard. But you do need someone to write that down. So again, step 1's really easy, pen and paper. All right.
Okay.
Step 2, have everyone give you names of individuals that have impacted their lives. Okay. These
Mm,
are family, friends. It could be entertainers,
mm,
coworkers, somebody you met at a park. And at this point, you're not asking why. All
okay.
you want is names. All right. So you don't want to stop and go, well, why'd you tell me? Why that person? Just give names.
Positive impact or any impact?
That's a great question, Maggie.
Okay.
These are positive impacts. Okay.
Okay.
So anyone who has positively impacted their lives, then you're going to do that. All right.
Got it.
Appreciate you clarifying that because that's important. It is positive impact. Again, you're not asking why at the time they were a
Right.
positive impact. Just grab some names. I'll give an example of some names that showed up on ours. And so you had everything from Grandma and Pappy to a guy at Disney World. We had a name of a guy at Disney World when they were younger who helped us. He went above and beyond what he was
Mm,
supposed to be doing. And so his name just simply was Guy at Disney World. All right. And the kids knew who he was. Oh, yeah, I know exactly who that is.
Hmm.
So you want to get a list of names. All right.
Okay.
Step 3, once you have a healthy list, you want to go back and give attributes to each individual.
Hmm.
All right. So every single one of them, now you're asking why. I'm going to give you again some examples here. Grandma and Pappy show up on our list. All
Right.
right. This is what was said: serving, generous, Christ-like, dedicated, passionate, selfless.
Mm.
My kids could not stop talking about
Oh.
Grandma and Pappy.
Oh, that's great.
And we had name after name. So if you want to know why pillars are important, when I started looking at names, 90% of the names were from church. These are people that impacted them from church attendance. The bulk of the people were. And you've got all of these names. I will say this too. One of the things that surprised me wasn't so much who made the list, it was who didn't.
Hmm.
That
Tell
stood out
me
to
what you
me.
mean by that.
Okay, so there are people that in my mind I thought might have impacted them, but that behind the scenes I watched and was like, I don't know about that.
Hmm.
Like that person.
Okay.
Well, they didn't make the list, which
Hmm.
tells me my kids might have been a little bit more observant than I thought.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I can't give you the names because if they would listen to it,
Right.
but I'm talking about family,
Yeah.
those things that you're just like, wow, they saw that,
Yeah.
So you have these and you give everyone an attribute.
Mm-hmm.
All right. At that point, you're going to start talking a little bit about those attributes.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where you can start asking the whys. Why serving? What happens is they begin to articulate the why. Why did they put down Chad? All right. Chad Freeman, one of my best friends. Well, why did he make the list? And my daughter goes to our old church last Sunday with her volleyball team. They happen to be in Georgia. And Chad comes up to her and says, hey, I just want to tell you how much I love you. Here's $100 and I want to take care of you. Well, he
Oh,
made the list a week before. They have
yeah.
not seen him in a long time. You know what
Yeah.
that tells me? Chad Freeman's consistent. He's a giver. He loves my kids. And there's a reason he made the list. All right. Okay, so next here, let's call it step 4. Once you have several attributes, start breaking them down to the top 5 attributes for your family you would like to be known for. All right, this is where everything slows down. Okay, so you've got your healthy list, you've got all of those, and here's an assignment from step 3. I want you guys to think about the attributes. I want you to narrow them down to 10 to 20 individual attributes. Next week's family meeting, we're talking about them. So you come back to step 4 the following week, and you're going to try to take those to 5. Take your time getting to 5. All right. Remember, the idea isn't to finish this. The idea is to start communicating. You go into that meeting with the idea of we take each one and we start getting it down to, let's say, 10. And you find out, well, why did we get them to 10? Well, possibly because somebody said dedicated and determined and said, hey, that's the same thing. So you come up with, we'll take dedicated. So they get there. Now, we then go into why dedicated. Now, you see where it can take some time if you take each one. Put a time limit on your meeting so you're not there a long time, but just we're working through this, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Because, I mean, to your point about not rushing through it, I can see where taking the time and having your kids discuss why being dedicated should be included more than being generous is only going to produce fruit in their minds and in their hearts, because they're arguing over which of these is more valuable. And the answer is they're
Yeah,
both valuable,
both
but you're
valuable.
letting them process through that.
Yes, and enjoy that whole thing.
Yeah,
All
that's
right,
great.
and it could be over that month you're coming down to we're going to get to 5. And the reason you try to do 5 really is because 3 to 5 is really what you should be at, because it's really all your mind can really think about. You get into 15 and someone goes, what's yours? And you're like, I don't know. Somewhere in there is, I think we're dedicated. So you slow it down. And
Okay.
then what you do is you work yourself through this. Let's say this takes you a month, 2 months to get it down to 5. Once you get it to 5, you want to assign each family member the task of writing a mission statement using those 5 words. Okay? So they've got to be in there. Let's take, in fact, I'm going to read you my daughter Miranda's. Okay.
Okay.
I thought it was pretty good. Our family is dedicated to regular church attendance, daily Bible reading, fostering guided relationships, embracing personal responsibility, and maintaining a strong work ethic to honor God and grow in our faith.
Mhm.
By instilling these values into our daily lives, we aim to support each other in becoming responsible, diligent, and spiritually grounded individuals. That was a pretty good couple of sentences there, right?
Wow. Yeah.
And so all 5 of mine, I mean, I'm going to give you the one of mine. The general goal of our family is to spread the gospel. So one of mine, that's what they got. We did this whole thing. That's it. Guess what? Nothing wrong with that, right? So you got one that really articulates, one that here. Each
Yep.
one is given an assignment, and we actually celebrate their sentence. That's good. This is what you believe. This is how this has come together. Once you do that, you're going to continue kind of working through the attributes and the sentences. And the last step is write your mission statement.
Mm-hmm.
All of those, write it. Now, remember, when you're guiding them through this, if you had more than one kid, you can't say, we're going to use yours. Remember, it's a team effort, and we're going to put them all together. When you put these together, you want to make sure that you put a few goals together with it. All right. So if I'm going to be church attendance, daily Bible, guided French, all those, then we have to be okay letting people hold us accountable for it. Right? So if I call my daughter and say, were you in church? She's never offended because she knows, according to our mission statement, I get to ask that question.
Right.
Okay.
And she was a part of that.
Yes. And I'm not offended if she says no. She just simply knows, should have been there. Right?
Right.
That's it.
Right.
If one of them is not taking personal responsibility for something in our home, then we get to hold them accountable. Now, sometimes doing that, I've got one right now that's reacting in a way that is not very good. Okay. Her reaction to her responsibility is not good. Here's what I found is one of my other kids looks at her and says, it's who we are. Just do the dishes and have a smile on your face. Well, that person gets to hold. Now, in a family, it sounds great. They got to arguing back and forth.
Sure.
And I just got to sit there and listen. And by the time it was done, it was like, all right, here's what we're going to do. You're going to now be quiet and you're still going to do the dishes. So we're not talking about something where it's this pie and this, oh, this is incredible.
Right.
But it did bring it down.
Yep.
She understood, but it wasn't dad being I've got to. She knew, all right, it is my responsibility. Now with her, what we're working on is personal responsibility and the gratitude that comes with it, right? She's not very thankful for her responsibility. But you see where it all works itself out in a mission statement.
Yep. And the fact that your other kids are saying, this is who we are, and they're having that conversation. It's not just you. It's not just that top down, this is mom and dad, and they're making us do all these things. But even for her siblings, she may not like it and she may fight back. But I guarantee that carries a lot of weight to hear that even her sibling was recognizing the things that you guys are also trying to teach.
Right. So that's that family meeting time, right? But that kind of gets you to the mission statement. What you get to enjoy is the process of nonstop communicating with your kids. And remember, you don't have to have a lengthy. My last meeting with them, I put the clock on it, told them it was 1 hour or less. We get to 1 hour and we're not done. It does have to end. So I'll end it. And then if the kids are like, we'll hang out a little bit longer. Now we're having some fun, right? And typically that is how it goes because the comedian in the family starts telling jokes about what we're doing. It's just fun to watch.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's okay that they're cracking jokes about the process.
Remember, because this isn't devotion time. It's not, there are some times where it's a serious, hey, we're going to do a little Bible study here. But that's some practical ways that I think that someone could start the process.
I so appreciate those 7 steps. They are steps that I feel like any parent can do that. I could at least get the first couple steps done. So again, we'll put those in the show notes, and I could talk about this forever because I think parenting is a tough thing. And when we get really practical, it's so beneficial for us as parents. So I appreciate how you have broken this down, and you gave us some really good nuggets about how we should view success going forward, knowing that it's not foolproof, knowing that they don't have to take it serious, that we can do 5 minutes is enough. They can crack jokes, they can make fun of it, but it's okay. They're talking with us, they're in the room, and we're going to move forward. But let's wrap up our time. I want to ask you this one big question. We started talking about how you've spent all this time watching families on courts and ball fields and in schools and dealing with parents and students for many, many, many years. But taking all that into account, everything that we said today, what would you say is just the biggest piece of advice you could leave parents with today?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest advice is man, you've got to man just love your kids through everything that they're going through, and maybe uh, let them fail.
Mm,
Uh, I think as parents, what I've seen in schools now is just kid doesn't get playing time, and then it's a big deal. My kid's going to lose their mind, and so we begin to fight this battle instead of helping them kind of fight through. Like, why don't we just go practice more,
mm,
or why don't we do this, or why don't you learn this one trait that is a trait of maturity? Is simply cheer the person on that beat you out. Man, that would show God's love. We tend to fight some battles for them. I would say love them like crazy, but let them fail. Let them learn through the failure. And then don't be so hard on yourself as a parent.
mm,
When my kids have failed and, I get in the car and I go somewhere and just sit because I keep thinking, man, I failed them. And
mhm.
I think what I would tell parents is, your kids are going to mess up and it's okay. At school, when a kid messes up, I don't think bad parents. I've been there. Look, my kids have had the detentions. My kids have done some stupid stuff. And what we do is we work through it, communicate through it. So love them, let them fail, let them learn through the failure, and trust in God. And just don't be too hard on yourself as well, parents.
Great advice. Guided life choices, especially as they
Hmm.
get older and not just taking over, but then, like you said, setting aside our own pride and realizing that they are imperfect human beings just like we
Hmm.
are. I love that. Well, listen, this was amazing. So
Yeah.
thank you so much for being with us.
Wow, what an incredible conversation you and Rodney had.
I definitely thought so. I mean, I walked away with a lot of points of, reflection and action steps.
Yeah, so did I. I mean, as a quick wrap up for today's episode, I think we should talk about some of those key takeaways as a means to really summarize the conversation and offer an official challenge to our Made for More listeners. Essentially, we're asserting that both the product and the process of working through family core values can offer rich, beneficial experience for the entire family, particularly for parents who are intentionally looking at how to shepherd and shape their children's hearts. So as a parent, I can worry less about like the final destination, establishing these core values, making sure they're worded perfectly, all that kind of stuff, and just realize that I can relish that journey because that journey along the way is so beneficial.
Absolutely. And I find a lot of comfort in that
Yeah.
because we're such a fast paced, goal driven society. But what we're saying is that the goal is both the process and the
Yeah.
product. And if we think back to our earlier comment about the statistics with New Year's resolutions, how often they're left unmet, this process seems like a no brainer for me as a parent.
Yeah, exactly. Because that increased communication and even just the establishment of the concept of having a regular family meeting structure in your home, I mean, it's going to give so many opportunities to go into your kids' thinking in their hearts, help them meaningfully process their experiences, which we know is key to biblical worldview formation.
Yeah, so that was also a takeaway for me, that benefit of establishing family core values, the proactive parenting process that, as you mentioned, supports future
Yeah.
conversations, future discussions between you and your child. But a related takeaway for me was that, when you do this as a family and you have multiple children, you are going to actually find times that you are not the only one doing the parenting.
Yeah.
So one of your other children or maybe somebody else in your home may help and they can reinforce those ideas, those core values, and they're not just a, mom or dad thing.
Yeah.
And sometimes our children will actually hear things from their siblings that they are not as quick to accept from us as parents.
Yeah, that reminds me, one more thing I want to share. Well, actually, I think two more things. Number one, just to pick up on what you just said, several months ago, I'd talked with some of my kids about some goals that I had, and they
Mhm.
weren't even in like formal family sit down conversations. One of them was literally with my youngest son. We were in the car together, and I was just sharing a couple things.
Mm.
Well, do you know that months later, he said, "So, Dad, how's it going with your goal? And he knew exactly, he remembered what I'd talked about and he talked about it specifically. So that's the idea of, it's so cool when your young adult kids then turn around and start asking you the questions. Just
Yeah.
really cool. And it really hit to my core values as a human being and as a man, as a leader, things that I want in my life. And my own son was asking me about them. So that's a
so
real
cool.
specific example of, I won't say he was parenting me, but he had embraced the concept.
Mhm.
But as I think about the conversation that you had with Rodney, one of the things I love, it just made me smile so much, was the Knox boot camp.
Mhm.
I just thought that was so cool. Such a practical application of their family values and mission. And it was only short term. It wasn't like, okay, all summer, we're going to live by all of our values all the time.
Yeah.
It was, okay, guys, it's 5:00. I forget what time he actually said, but it's 5:00 in the morning, up and at 'em. We're doing Knox boot camp this week.
Yeah.
And I just love the idea of those special moments of intensely living out your values.
Mm.
And we even know from military or from academic settings or all different kind of settings, those intense moments of being forced to live out values have a way of shaping hearts and turning minds and hearts' attention to those values at a deeper way. And honestly, as I was listening to it, I was like, I wish my kids were still at home, because, I have 5 kids. All of them are either out of the house or on the way out of the house. The youngest is 21. But I want to try the Erdvig version of family boot camp. So maybe Lori and I have often talked about having Erdvig grandchildren camp. So maybe we'll do it with the grandkids.
Oh, that's a great idea. Well, we hope that this month's podcast was as beneficial for our listeners as it was for us. Gave them lots of ideas, just like it did for us. But we want to challenge you, the listener, to take a step forward and towards increasing conversation in your home, no matter where you're at. But increase that conversation with your kids. Tackle at least one portion of the process that Rodney outlined. And don't forget that those steps are listed in the show notes for easy reference. But just try it and then share it with your parent friends, or even talk to someone on staff at Emmanuel and just talk to them about how it's going.
Yeah, such a great and a specific challenge. And we'll hope you join us next month as we tackle a pressing and ever-present challenge in parenting: relationships. So we're going to talk about how we walk our kids through friendships, knowing how influential those are to their worldview formation.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're going to get even more specific and talk about those budding male-female relationships that our kids may or may not be interested in. So we don't want you to miss it.
Made for More podcast is a production of Summit Ministries Center for Biblical Worldview Formation and Emmanuel Schools. Emmanuel exists to equip students to serve God and neighbor through mind, body, and soul based on a Christian-centered foundation. Join us next month on Made for More.